The Forgotten Ones. Chapter 4. The Silent Pursuit. Ellis jolts awake. He had nodded off to sleep while waiting for the rain to let up. He felt the weight of exhaustion settle into his bones. His body ached as though he had fought a battle in his sleep. A battle he had lost. The events of the previous night lingered in his mind, vivid and unshakable. The Watcher, that figure standing in the rain, motionless, yet somehow alive with intention, had disappeared as suddenly as it had come, but its presence had not left. He hadn't slept, not really. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt that same cold gaze on him, like 1,000 needles piercing his skin. So when the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, he left the diner. Numb to the world, the waitress's lingering, terrified stare burning in his mind. She had seen it too. That was what kept gnawing at him. He wasn't going mad. Not yet. As Ellis trudged down the city streets, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the sky remained a thick blanket of gray. The buildings around him seemed taller than usual, more oppressive, their windows like dark, watchful eyes. Every corner he turned, every alley he passed, he could feel it. That sensation of being followed, stalked. It knows your fear. Peter's words haunted him as he approached his apartment building. The cracked walls, the peeling paint. It all felt like a distant memory now. This place had once been home, but today it felt alien, as though it no longer belonged to him, as though he had left some part of himself back at Peter's apartment, or maybe back in that diner where the Watcher had found him. Ellis stopped at the entrance, his hand hovering over the door handle. A prickling sensation crawled up his neck, and he glanced over his shoulder, scanning the street behind him. Empty. Or so it seemed. His eyes flicked to the shadows between the buildings. In the dim morning light, they appeared to shift and pulse like living things, watching. He swallowed hard and pushed the door open, stepping inside his building. The moment the door shut behind him, the heaviness of silence enveloped him. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the narrow, dimly lit hallway as he made his way up the creaky stairs to his apartment. His hands shook as he unlocked the door. He wasn't sure if it was from the cold or the fear that had taken root deep inside him. The fear that Peter had been right all along. That the shadows were alive, watching and waiting. Inside, the air was stale. The windows still shut tight from the night before. He didn't bother to take off his jacket. Didn't even bother to turn on the lights. He just needed to sit. To think, to figure out what the hell he was going to do next. But as Ellis sank into the worn-out armchair by the window, the silence in his apartment seemed to thicken. It was suffocating. His eyes drifted to the papers scattered across the floor. The notes, the maps, the ramblings of a man who had clearly been terrified of something he couldn't escape. The Watcher. Ellis grabbed Peter's map again, his fingers trembling as he unfolded it. The blue-circled location stood out to him. The one Peter had labeled the Watcher. It was a place Ellis didn't recognize. Some building deep in the heart of the city, far from where he lived. His gut twisted as he considered going there. Whatever Peter had found, it had led him to this spot. And now, Ellis wasn't sure if he had any choice but to follow. Before he could talk himself out of it, Ellis grabbed his phone and dialed Peter's number. He knew it was a long shot, but some irrational part of him still hoped to hear Peter's voice on the other end, to tell him this was all a mistake, that he'd misread the signs, that the Watcher wasn't real. But the line rang and rang, until finally there was a click. A voice, low, distorted, and far too close for comfort. whispered through the phone. "It's watching you." Alice dropped the phone, his breath catching in his throat. He stared at it, lying face down on the floor, the soft hum of static now filling the room. The voice echoed in his mind, cold and unnerving. It knew him. It knew where he was. He scrambled to his feet, his heart racing as he paced the room, panic rising in his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to get out. To run, but where could he go? Where could he possibly be safe? His eyes darted to the window. The curtains slightly parted, just enough to let in a sliver of gray light, and that's when he saw it again. Standing in the street below, cloaked in shadows. The Watcher. It didn't move. It didn't need to. Alice stumbled backward, his breath shallow. How was it possible? How could it know where he was? Where to find him, no matter where he went? And then a thought struck him, piercing through the fog of fear that clouded his mind. Maybe it wasn't finding him at all. Maybe Alice was leading it. Maybe every step he took, every action, every thought. He was pulling the Watcher closer, guiding it toward him like a beacon. He grabbed Peter's notes again, frantically searching for something he had missed. There had to be a way to stop it, a way to sever the connection. "Don't let them in," Peter had written. Alice's eyes widened. It wasn't the Watcher he needed to fear. It was the moment he acknowledged its presence, the moment he let it into his mind. That was when it became real. That was when it could touch him. But it was too late. He had already let it in. The sound of static from the phone grew louder, filling the room with an unnatural hum. Alice's pulse quickened, and as he turned toward the window, the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow darker, closing in. The Watcher wasn't just outside anymore. It was here, inside the walls, inside his mind. And Alice had nowhere left to run. The shadows stretched, swallowing the room whole, and Alice knew deep down that the Watcher was no longer watching. It was waiting. Thanks for joining this chapter of The Forgotten Ones. If the mystery has you hooked, be sure to like, subscribe, and share to spread the word. There's much more to uncover, and the next chapter will take you deeper into the forgotten. Stay tuned and prepare for what lies ahead. The stories may end, but the nightmares continue. Sleep soundly, if your mind lets you.